The fallout from the GM announcement reverberating at Queen's Park today.
As John mentioned, it's the second major blow to Ontario's auto industry in recent weeks. CTV's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Siobhan Morris.
They'll hear from lawyers.
If they breach a contract, we're going to sue them. Simple as that. And he knows that. They've breached a contract. And we're going to make sure that we get another vehicle in that area.
Stellantis had an obligation to bring back the production to the Brampton plant, and they failed that obligation. And so that's why we're putting maximum pressure on the company.
Golden hour aerial sweep over snow-dusted factories and rail lines, river reflections and soft winter sunlight. Macro close-ups of conveyor rollers and idle robotic arms with blinking LEDs, shallow depth of field slider pass. Something's unfolding in Ontario that barely made the evening news, yet it may reveal one of Canada's biggest economic secrets. It started as a billion-dollar bet, the opening of the first full-scale commercial electric vehicle plant in Canada. Less than 3 years after Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford's grand promise to electrify the future, General Motors abruptly pulled the plug. The Cami Ingersoll plant in southwestern Ontario has ended production of the BrightDrop electric van, a project once celebrated as the cornerstone of Canada's EV revolution. The shutdown hit like a shockwave. Overnight, more than 1,000 workers were affected. On paper, this looked like a headline that could have triggered panic. Lost jobs, suspended production, and fears of a domino effect across the auto sector. But that's not what happened. Instead of collapse, Canada's response was calm, calculated, and surprisingly effective. Ottawa activated emergency training programs. Unions stepped in to protect wages. Regional suppliers redirected their focus to domestic projects to keep the supply chain intact. Within days, operations stabilized. While U.S. auto plants made headlines for mass layoffs and uncertainty, Canada quietly held its ground. It begs the question, how did a country hit by the same tariffs and the same market downturn manage to stay steady? What is Canada doing differently that others aren't seeing? The answer lies not just in reaction, but in preparation. Behind the Cami shutdown sits a much larger chain reaction that began in Washington. When the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on vehicles assembled in Canada, the impact was instant. Parts became more expensive, logistics slowed, and automakers like GM suddenly faced an uphill battle. Internal estimates suggest GM absorbed more than $1.1 billion in tariff costs in a single quarter, with total losses between $4 and $5 billion for the year. Yet north of the border, Canada refused to let the system break. Instead of chaos, Ottawa activated a precise network of support, targeted relief programs, tax credits, regional adjustment funds, and emergency supply chain grants, all designed to keep production moving. Suppliers that once relied on U.S. imports began redirecting their operations inward, strengthening domestic manufacturing and reducing exposure to the American tariff storm. This contrast is hard to miss. While Washington doubled down on protectionism, Ottawa doubled down on stability. And that difference, calm over chaos, may be exactly what's keeping Canada's auto industry alive while others falter. But the tariffs weren't the only challenge. Canada's EV industry faced a second test, the country's unforgiving climate. BrightDrop's pause wasn't just an economic story, it was also a scientific one. Electric vehicles face real performance issues in extreme cold. Studies by the Canadian Automobile Association show that temperatures between 7 degrees Celsius and 15 degrees Celsius can cut EV driving range by up to 39%. Nearly 2/3 of Canadian EV owners report noticeable performance drops during winter months, enough to make early models like BrightDrop struggle to meet delivery targets in northern regions. Instead of viewing this as a setback, Canada saw an opportunity. Across Ontario, startups are developing cold-resistant battery cells capable of efficient performance in sub-zero conditions. Logistics giants like Purolator and Canada Post are transitioning to hybrid and hydrogen-powered fleets to maintain reliability year-round. What was once a weakness, the cold, has become a catalyst for innovation, pushing Canadian engineers to design EVs that can survive where others stall. This adaptability highlights Canada's quiet advantage: preparation. While other nations scramble to react, Ottawa had already built what economists now call a shock absorber economy. Rather than waiting for crises to unfold, Canada developed a set of financial and industrial tools to protect jobs, stabilize production, and sustain worker confidence, even during turbulence. Between 2020 and 2024, the country attracted over $46 billion in EV-related investments, supported by more than $52 billion in public incentives, the largest in the G7 relative to GDP. These aren't abstract numbers. Behind them lies a structured system, a $5 billion strategic response fund to help companies hit by tariffs, a regional adjustment fund that recently doubled to $1 billion to support manufacturers, and a $450 million retraining initiative to help 50,000 workers move into EV and battery supply roles. The result is trust, a rare currency in modern industry. Canadian workers see government policy not as distant bureaucracy, but as an active partner that moves with the market. That confidence, more than any subsidy, is what keeps Canada's industrial engine running when others stall. Meanwhile, across the border, GM's U.S. operations are bearing the full brunt of the tariff war. The company has absorbed more than $4.5 billion in additional tax-related costs and is being forced to reinvest billions more just to navigate domestic political barriers and reconfigure its supply chains. For a company once seen as the symbol of American industrial power, it's a structural setback. Analysts now describe Canada as GM's natural buffer zone, a stable hub for research, testing, and engineering, insulated from the volatility that plagues U.S. operations. Lower energy prices, predictable policy, and streamlined logistics give Canada an edge in a region dominated by economic uncertainty. Around Ontario, that advantage is multiplying. Projects like Volkswagen's St. Thomas battery plant and the Stellantis LGES facility in Windsor have created an ecosystem of suppliers and skilled labor that companies like GM can still rely on. It's a sharp contrast. While the U.S. wrestles with political headwinds and cost pressures, Canada is quietly becoming the only place in North America where the EV transition is moving at full speed. The BrightDrop pause didn't derail that vision, it clarified it. It reminded investors and policymakers alike that depending too heavily on U.S. markets isn't a guarantee, it's a vulnerability. In response, Canada is building a self-contained made-in-Canada EV value chain, one that stretches from the mines of the north to the ports of the Atlantic. It's an ecosystem that connects raw materials, advanced manufacturing, and export logistics under one integrated system. In the mineral-rich north of Ontario and Quebec, a new industrial backbone is emerging. Nickel, lithium, and cobalt, once exported as raw materials, are now being processed domestically to feed Canada's growing EV ecosystem. Ottawa's public investment now exceeds private capital by more than 14%, signaling that Canada isn't playing for short-term gain, but for long-term independence. Ontario, long known for its assembly lines, is undergoing its most profound transformation in decades. Cities like St. Thomas, Windsor, and Alliston are evolving into centers for battery chemistry, material science, and clean manufacturing. Universities, startups, and global corporations are forming cooperative models rarely seen elsewhere in North America. Collaboration replacing competition. Meanwhile, new Canada-EU partnerships are quietly reshaping the country's export future. Under emerging green trade frameworks, Canada is positioning itself to supply carbon-neutral batteries to Europe by 2026, a move that could give Ottawa the leverage it has long lacked. This eastward pivot offers Canada a chance to grow without relying solely on the U.S. consumer base, diversifying its markets and strengthening its industrial autonomy. By choosing independence over dependency, Canada isn't just insulating itself from the next economic shock, It's redrawing the industrial map of the continent. If this strategy succeeds, the next chapter of North American manufacturing might not be written in Detroit or Texas, but in Ontario and Quebec. BrightDrop may have paused, but Canada hasn't. What looked like a crisis became a real-world stress test of the nation's resilience, and the results speak for themselves. In an era of volatility and protectionism, Canada has shown what long-term strategy and quiet stability can achieve. While others swing between tariffs, politics, and production cuts, Canada holds its rhythm, protecting jobs, attracting investment, and keeping its factories humming. Instead of chasing protectionism, Ottawa has embraced smart adaptation, balancing worker protection with open opportunity. It's a pragmatic model, not flashy, but remarkably effective. GM continues to operate in Canada, not just as a manufacturer, but as a believer in the stability of its northern partner. Economists now call Canada's approach North America's most effective shock absorption model. It's not about luck, it's about consistency. And in a world where markets can shift overnight, consistency might just be the rarest competitive advantage of all. So as the dust settles, one question remains. If Canada can stay this steady through chaos, can North America's supply chain really function without Canada at its center? Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Every click helps fuel the truth.